culture, and environment are often called the cause of crime in the inner cities. But today you will discover the power and effect that a Christian father has on his children and his family. Today you will hear how a man of God prayed for, mentored, and was involved in the making of a great man of God. The son this father prayed for is now a world leader and preacher that has ministered to hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. Today, the power of praying parents will be heard on Old Man, New Man. Welcome to Old Man, New Man. I'm glad that our guest today is Pastor James Black from the North American Division. Welcome, Pastor Black.
It's good to be here.
We're glad you're here, and you are the youth director and young adult director for North America.
That's correct.
And how long have you been in that position?
I've been there for about 10 and a half years now.
Excellent. Now, Pastor Black, you have a tremendous story and testimony found in your book, God's Got a Plan, and I'm in it.
Yes.
And I was happy to read it, and there were times my wife caught me laughing and asked me what I was laughing about, and there were chapters in your book where you tell your story. Yeah. Tell us where you grew up and tell us about your family.
I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, southern boy here, so had a great time growing up in the South. Grew up in a large family.
Savannah.
Large family, mom, dad, and 7 sisters, and there were 2 boys in the family. So pretty large family.
So there were 9 of you.
Yes.
Okay, and in Savannah, Georgia, and was it a middle class, upper class, lower class? Was it kind of like the hood?
We live on the west side of Savannah, so
west side.
Classified pretty much as the low income area of the city. We loved family, we loved the neighborhood, but it was sort of the hood, is what you would call it nowadays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, your father and your mother were very significant in your life, and there was a time where they both accepted Christ.
Yes.
Were you already born at that point, or was it before you were born?
They actually met about a year before I was born, were baptized, and I came along 9 months later.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you had an older brother and 7 sisters.
Yes, I had an older brother, and actually I'm the middle child, so there were 4 under me, 4 younger sisters, and 3 sisters older, and a brother. And that was as a result of 2 marriages. When my mother met my father, she was a widow with 4 small children at the time. And so she met Dad, and he had 5. And
now, from the very beginning of your story, you bring out the fact that your father felt a call to ministry.
Yes.
At one point in his life.
Yes.
But he felt that it wasn't for him, but he made a covenant or a promise to God. Tell us about that promise.
Yeah. Dad was an incredible man. Mm-hmm. Always felt that he was called to preach, and God spoke to him through dreams, because I think because of his limited education, could not read and those kinds of things. He also had a speech impediment, and because of that, he felt he just could not preach. He could not do it. But he said that God gave him a dream that he would have a son one day, and that son would grow up to be a preacher. And sure enough, he had 4 girls of his own and a son. I was his firstborn, and I guess I'm a preacher, so,
okay.
So something was to the dream.
But how you got to be a preacher is what your book is all about.
Yes.
How
yes.
God was in it, and God's plan was being unfolded. Yeah. Now, it's not easy to grow up in the neighborhood you grew up, and there was violence, there were drugs, there was crime, and you were very close to your brother, Jesse. Mm-hmm. Tell us about Jesse.
Yeah. Jesse was a good guy, lots of energy, and I think, before my mom met my father, she was a widow, and, she's trying to raise these young children. So Jesse was kind of the man of the house until my dad came along, and that created a little tension here and there, because he was the man. Now there's another man coming over trying to be the man, and that kind of thing. So he grew up a bit challenged in the neighborhood, but he was my older brother, man, and all I knew is I want to be like older brother.
And you say that he looked out for you, huh?
Oh, yeah.
If they bothered you, they had to look out for Jesse.
Yeah, you had to deal with Jesse. And he could hold his own very well in the neighborhood. And at the time, you had to. If you couldn't hold your own in the neighborhood, it wasn't a good day. And Jesse was definitely to fall back on.
Now, what happened to Jesse?
Jesse had some struggles, and a good heart, a great kid, but the environment and what we were dealing with at the time was tough, and there were times when he didn't make some good decisions and so forth. And the day came when, and there was some rumblings in the neighborhood. We'll never know the true story, but there were some things happening in the neighborhood, and supposedly some friends came by and they were going to go swimming, and all we know is that Jesse didn't come back, and he died that day.
So Jesse died that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had your suspicions about his death.
Yeah, there were a lot of suspicions about the death. All the stories told were a bit different. And several weeks later, when my life was somewhat challenged, I put two and two together, realized there was more to it than just an accident. And different things that were on his body from what the funeral director told us and so forth. We knew that there had to be some kind of scuffle or some type of, altercation. And but again, what happened actually we'll never know. But he did die under questionable circumstances.
And so you grew up in an environment where there was violence, there was crime, there was great risk of life, and yet you're a preacher. Mm-hmm. What role did prayer and family worship play after Jesse's death and in your development?
Played a huge part. No matter what we saw on the streets, no matter how many alcoholics we saw out there, no matter who was getting stabbed, no matter how many police sirens we would hear and that kind of thing. Growing up in a home where you had a mom and a dad, morning and evening calling us together to pray, that became a foundation.
Did you always want to come pray with them when they called you?
No. And what was interesting is they would always call worship at the time the best television show was on. It's like it's like the moment Gunsmoke comes on, we got to pray, and But the impact was there, and I tell the story about one night I came in, was hanging on the street, and something just said go home, and I came home, and my mom and my dad were on their knees praying, and I heard them call my name in the prayer. They didn't hear me come in, but I was walking past their room, and they were praying, God, my son is out there someplace, bring him home, and I'll never forget hearing that, to think that wow, worship is not just a thing, prayer is not just something that we do, but mom and dad are actually talking to God about me. That made an impact.
You're bringing this point out, brings to mind the fact that when parents are praying for their children, not just does God hear, but the children around them, they hear it. And as you heard them pray your name, that had a huge impact on your life.
Yeah, because days later you would confront various things, and you realize that the spiritual battle is real, but you're not in it by yourself. Mom and dad are talking to God on my behalf.
Because what you grew up experiencing was a pull from the world that was very strong. The culture, the neighborhood, the environment, it was just pulling at your soul for destruction. What would you say happened to most of the friends that grew up with you? Are they still around? Or?
Well, it's interesting. Growing up, a lot of the friends from the neighborhood, they're no longer here. Many of them have died, tragically, be it drugs, be it violence. And it's strange. As I was writing the book, it just hit me over and over again how blessed I am, because friends of mine, and these are childhood friends, you would call them. Not here. It's a strange phenomenon.
And so they're all dead? They're gone?
Yeah, many of them.
But you were pulled out from that.
Yeah, and every time I think about it, it kind of gives me chills, because who am I? And I talk about being a POG.
What's a POG?
POG is one who is a product of God's grace.
Okay.
And I count myself privileged to just be a product of God's grace.
And so even though you were in this environment, you became what you became because of their prayers.
Yes.
And because of their involvement.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned in your book that your father had a vision for you from early on. Tell us about that vision.
Yeah. Dad would tell everybody, my son's going to be a preacher. My son's going to be a preacher.
And that was that in your mind?
Nah, man. I wanted to play football and talk to the little girls, And that was the last thing I was thinking about. But he had this vision. He had this passion. He always told people, sometimes unexpectedly, at family reunions, gatherings, this is my son, he's going to be a preacher. I'm like, Dad, give me a break here, you're ruining my reputation with the girls a little bit, but he believed it.
So he was speaking words into your life.
Yeah, yeah.
Even from early on, and he was beginning to declare, almost like the prophets and the patriarchs of the Old Testament would declare over their sons what they were to become.
Yeah.
He was calling you as a preacher.
Yeah. And as a result of that, you get a little reputation as a preacher. And I talk about when we played house as children, interestingly, I would always be asked to be the preacher. And so during the playing house routine, I had to preach a sermon to my friends in the neighborhood, and I would be sweating and preaching hard and so forth.
Fire and brimstone.
It was fun, but I couldn't be daddy with the little girls, so I had to be the preacher. So
oh man, I'll tell you. But the words of your father, I just want to emphasize that, had such an impact over your life. And so often as men and dads, we're a little careless with our words and say a negative name to our children. Right. But I want to caution the dads to just be careful and to speak words of life like your father did to you. And even playing childhood games. You were the preacher even there.
Yeah. And I want to bring out the point that even though there were times I didn't appreciate it, even though there were times I didn't know exactly how to connect with it, those words were planted deep. And there were times I know there was things I stayed away from because Daddy believed that this guy's going to be a preacher. And I didn't know how to connect the dots. I just didn't quite understand how to process it. But I didn't take it too, lightly. It wasn't a joke at all. But because Dad always said it with a straight face. And it wasn't a joking kind of thing. No, this is my son, the preacher.
And he introduced you as such.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Excellent. And so we see him praying for you and praying for you by name. We see him declaring good things over your life. But there's also something we've learned with men's ministries and something a new man does, and that is preaching a good sermon without speaking any words. Now, your father was a deacon at his church. Tell us about Mr. Kane and about that experience with your mother and father.
Yeah, and that's pretty deep in the book. The brief story is an elderly man, member of the church, real sick, and no one was taking care of him. And Mom and Dad volunteered to go and take care of this man. And interestingly, out of 9 children, they only chose me to go with them. And we get to the man's house, and the house is just a mess. It's unbelievable. Rats, roaches running all over the place. And
they brought you with them.
They brought me with them, and I didn't want to go, but, you have no choice. You're going to go if they say you're going to go. And we get there, and we see this place in a mess, and we finally go to Brother Kane's room in the back, and when the door opened, I'll never forget what I saw. Here lies this elderly man laying in his filth. I mean, just a sight that is difficult to describe even to this day. And I was 8 years old at the time.
8 years old.
And what my mom and dad did that day has given me a frame of thought and thinking now that nothing else would shake. But they just took their jackets off and they got busy. They pulled back the spreads, and you see all this filth, and they just started cleaning him up. Dad started cleaning him up. Mama's heating the water and wiping the filth off of his body and that kind of thing. Your
dad was about 6'1".
Yeah, right? About 6'2" and about
6'2".
Yeah.
And so you're watching your father clean this man up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Along with your mother.
Yeah.
And so what were you thinking at that point? Well,
I didn't know what to think. I'm just sitting here because I'm amazed at what I see. And the first thing is, this man is a member of my church. And we've got a large church. The first thing is, how could anyone allow a human being to be in this kind of condition? And then just seeing Mom and Dad, and I remember he was so apologetic. Oh, Brother and Sister Black, I'm so sorry that you got to see me like this. But they wouldn't say anything. They were just busy. They didn't respond saying, no, they just got busy with this guy. And I'm seeing my dad literally wipe the stuff off this man and then put his arms up under this guy and walk him to the bathtub and watch Dad scrub this man from head to toe. And I'm thinking, that's my dad.
Wow.
That's my dad, And he washed him and shaved him, and Mom, cleaned the bed up and so forth. And then Dad, after washing him and shaving him, And I mean, I saw Dad take the washcloth and get in between his eyes, up his nose, and under his arm, in his private parts, and washed him twice, actually. And then picked him up and brought him back to the bed, massaged his body with baby powder and lotion. And
so as you're watching this, James, you know, so many young people in the setting that you grew up in watch their fathers mistreat their mothers, watch their fathers walk away from them, violence, verbal abuse. But here you are watching your father take care of another individual with such care, strength, because he had it, but tenderness. And that was beginning to mold who you are even before you could understand it.
Dad was like a nurse to that man. I mean, he took care of him. I mean, he meticulously, you know, just took care of this man's body. And the thing about it is, I think about it now, there were no rubber gloves. You know, he wasn't concerned about what was getting on him. All Dad knew was, this man needs help, and I'm here today. And I'm sitting here just watching this whole thing.
And as you're watching, your character, your heart is being molded with these deep impressions that you write about now.
Yeah, and because I kept thinking, that's my dad. That's my dad. That's my mom. That's. I mean, there's a certain proudness that comes with that, pride that comes with that, that you never forget. And after Brother Kane is all cleaned out, that's when I noticed he locked eyes with me for the first time, and he asked me a question. He says, "Son, are these your parents?" And I looked at my dad and looked at my mom, and he says, I said, "Yeah." He says, I don't have much longer to live, but I want you to make me a promise. And that is, when you grow up, I want you to be just like your mom and just like your dad.
Wow.
And I looked at my dad with all this stuff on him.
What did you say?
Well, I looked at my dad with all this stuff on him, my mom with all this stuff on her. They're filthy, they're dirty. And I looked at them and I thought about the fact that nobody else was here for them today. And I thought to myself, yes, sir, Brother Kane. Yeah, I want to be just like them when I grow up. It was a promise I made.
So God was already molding and shaping and preparing you for the worldwide ministry you now have. Even there at 8 years old.
8 years old.
But your father's presence and your mother's work, and together, they were molding you just by their actions. Our actions are so important. Because our children are always watching what we do, what we watch, what we say, how we treat each other. And that helped you be who you become the man you now are.
And that was, for me, that was true mentorship, as I understand it now. Not just telling me about it, but I was there, and I was watching. And it's almost as if everything they were doing was a lesson, saying, pay attention because you're going to have to do this one day.
Now, speaking of lessons, you talk about how your father once made you rake some leaves. And you thought you were finished, and he told you you weren't. Tell us about that.
It's called Leaving No Leaves Behind. And Dad was something, man. You know, in our backyard, we had all these pecan trees. And you know how it is in the fall with pecan trees. Not only does not only do the pecans fall, but also the leaves. And a yard full of leaves, and Dad said, go rake the yard. Are you kidding? Yeah, but I had to rake the yard. And I raked that yard, and you rake it up into piles, and then you burn the leaves. And after I raked the yard, I came in the house, and Dad said, I thought I told you to rake the yard. I said, well, I did. No, you didn't. I did. No, you didn't. Go check. Dad, I raked the leaves. And he went outside, and he picked up a board, and there were some leaves around the edge of the board. And he said, there was another little set of leaves in a corner here and a corner there. He says, I thought I told you to rake the yard. And I went out and I raked the yard again and discovered several more piles of leaves. But that's how Dad was. No job is complete until it's done right. And that's what he taught me.
And that's kind of continued with you into your ministry and to the work you do now.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think that kind of mentoring allows you to see what no one else sees. Not only do I see the task, but I see it all the way through. And I kind of, it gives you a work ethic that says, you know, mediocrity is not a part of this plan. You know, I've got to do it right because Dad's going to come and check. You know, and it's almost as if our responsibility to God. We've got to do it right because He wants us to do it right.
So your father helped you develop a work ethic
that
has brought you great success, and God has used you in.
Yes, and I'm very grateful, very humbled by that as well.
And so while he made you work at times, he stood by you when you were having challenges as well.
Yes.
I know that in your book you talk about your high school experience.
Yeah.
And how you were having a challenge even graduating. You were trying to get out early.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your father encouraged you
Right.
to go forward and sign up for Oakwood.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I wasn't trying to get out early because I had a high academic scores or nothing like that. I was barely making it, and I make a joke about didn't know what a GPA was until I looked it up in the dictionary. But it was tough in high school. I didn't really apply myself like I should, just trying to make it. But I did enough to try to get by. But it got to the point where, okay, where are you going to go now? What are you going to do now? And Dad said, son, apply for Oakwood University, a Christian university there in Alabama. And now I want to go to the Navy. And Dad said, well, just fill out the papers and let's see what happens. And now I want to go to the Navy. And I think I want to go to the Navy for some defiance as well. I was trying to get away from some things, and I finally filled out the paperwork. And at the end of the summer, I found myself, at Oakwood University there in Huntsville, Alabama.
Because there was a teacher that was giving you some challenges?
Yeah.
Trying to hold you back?
Yeah, it was a simple thing, a final project in class where we had to do this project, and it was artwork included, so I did it in pencil, and it wasn't in ink, and so he failed me because it wasn't in ink. And he also mentioned that he was an atheist and that he didn't believe in God, and I told him I did believe in God, and I was going to pray that God would turn this thing around. So it became a battle. And that's when my mother and father, instilled within me, this is your first, maybe your first spiritual battle that you're going to have to see what God is going to do with this situation. So I began to pray and took that thing kind of personal now. Well, okay, let's see what God is going to do here. And I saw God work a situation out that was just amazing. And God ultimately got the glory because I was enrolled in Oakwood University that fall.
Excellent. And he also went with you to acquire some funding?
Yeah.
Took you to the bank or so?
Yeah, Dad, we went to one of these loan places to borrow some money, and that didn't go so well. I think it was just, Dad taught me how to deal with unfortunate situations such as racism and those kinds of things. And we went to borrow some money, and I think the man didn't believe the fact that my dad wanted to borrow the money so his son could go to college. So it became kind of a joke kind of thing, not taking us seriously. And I got a little frustrated with it and told my dad, let's go, we don't need this money. And or we got to get the money like this, it's not worth it. And we left, and Dad made a way later on as to getting the money to go to college.
At oldmannewman.com, you can watch this program and many others that will help you along life's journey. There you will also find the contact information of all our guests, along with resources that will further equip you. The Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:17 that if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. Ladies, when the men we love are strong and happy, we too are happier. We are here to equip the men with proven biblical information for success in their Christian adventure. Send us an email with any questions or comments you may have. Pastor Minner and I would love to hear from you. Old Man, New Man, dedicated to equipping God's men for this life and beyond.
Now, October 28th, 2005 was a very important day for you. Tell us about that event.
It was one of the most challenging days of my life. Circumstances where my wife and father ended up in the hospital the same week during the same time. We'd gone to see him because he was ill. My wife took ill, and they're both in the hospital at the same time. And it was just a crazy week. And that Friday, we discovered that both of them would have major surgery. And my wife would go into surgery. My father would go into surgery first, followed by my wife. And to make a long story short, that day, while I'm in the holding area waiting for my wife to go in, I hear the code over the speaker, and someone's in cardiac arrest and surgery, and I didn't think it was anything relating to us. And Come to find out it was my dad in cardiac arrest. And my phone rang, and I ran across the parking lot to see what was happening with him. And I get there, and there's chaos, and we realize that they're working on Dad. And meanwhile, the surgeon calls me, and I got to run back across the parking lot to my wife because she, they've got to take care of her. And as a result of all that, that day my dad died.
He died that day.
On the surgery table. And it was a tough day. And that day, went back to see about my wife, and the enemy tried to tell me that my wife was going to die that day too. And while my wife is in surgery, my father has just passed. My wife is now in surgery, and I call it a Gethsemane spot. I thought about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and the burden he bared that day. And I couldn't find a garden, I couldn't find a tree, but I saw an artificial plant in the waiting area. And I went and found that artificial plant. I grabbed hold to it, and I just prayed to God, Lord, you're going to get us through this.
Amen.
And my wife came through the surgery, and God blessed. And it was a difficult time, October 28th, but when we got to the funeral, it was also a day of joy because of that. There's a 3-hour funeral. Mom had asked me to preach the eulogy, and I'm like, Mom, please. And I said, no, you're going to do it. And it only took me 7 minutes to preach my dad's funeral because his life had said it all. His life had said it all. So although it was a difficult day, we rejoice in the fact that one day we're going to see him again.
And his favorite chapter?
Revelation 21.
Revelation 21. Why is that so?
Well, Dad was not the best reader, and whenever you would read Revelation 21 to me, we get all excited. And we didn't know why Dad would get excited. And then come to find out, I, John, saw the holy city, and Dad's name was John. And I realize now that every time he would read that, he saw himself, seeing the holy city. And we take courage in that today, and that's why I know I'm going to see him again one day.
Amen.
In the earth made new.
And so what's the message you would tell our viewers, the new man that wants to be the best father possible? What would you say to him?
I would say to the new man, let go and let God. Understand that you're in the plan. Understand that God chooses you to be in the plan. And we have to prepare for the plan. We have to protect the plan. We have to participate in the plan. We have to provide in the plan. Understand that you are of value to God.
Amen.
And he wants to use that.
Amen. Amen. And so there you have it. We'd like to dedicate this program to the memory of John D. Black, Pastor James Black's father. And so thank you for joining us on Old Man, New Man. Remember, be the best dad you can be. We'll see you next time on Old Man, New Man.